Okay. Today is April 16th, 2022. It's a kind of remarkable weekend, really. I happened to watch last night Steven Spielberg's film Lincoln. As it turns out, Lincoln died the morning of April 15th, 1685. I watched it on April 15th. It's a very moving film, tremendous depth to it in terms of things that we're all dealing with today. These days, I don't mean this moment, well, I do mean this moment. The same issues are at play in our culture today. In the States, it's only that the political parties have been reversed. Democrats are Republicans, Republicans, Democrats from the time of Lincoln. The other thing is, it was also Good Friday yesterday, time of resurrection, and the beginning of Passover, freeing slaves, releasing from bondage. And indeed, the word for Egypt in Hebrew, Mitzrayim, really means a narrow place. So Passover really means it's celebrating leaving the narrow places in ourselves. When we do, when we leave all those self-centered, narrow, bound little places that we're stuck in, we find, just as Hakuin says, this very land is the pure lotus land, this very body, the body of Buddha. This is what's meant, if we can symbolize for a bit, coming to the promised land, leaving Egypt, our narrow places, and coming to the promised land. This is the same story again and again. This is a constant human story, played out in different religions, different cultures, different practices. But the point is always the same, to come out of our places of bondage and all the harm they cause to ourselves and others, and to come to the place that's promised to us, the place that's been ours from the very beginning, which is exactly what the Master Hakuin's chant in praise of Zazen is showing. It's also the week of Sesshin in Vermont. That starts tonight. Rose is there in Vermont for Sesshin this week. So you'll be having to deal with my ministrations as it comes to chants and bells and such, which may be accurate or may not be. We shall see. So it's a powerful week, in other words, lots going on. And I'd like to do a series of teishos, next couple of weeks perhaps, from, I think, one of the most important pieces in the three pillars of Zen. It's Basui's Dharma talk on One Mind and his letters to his disciples. So we'll start with Roshi Kapleau, then Philip Kaplow's introduction as the editor of the Three Pillars of Zen to this. In the year 1327, toward the close of the Kamakura era, that strife-torn, anxiety-ridden period of Japanese history that produced so many notable religious figures, the Rinzai Zen master Basui Tokusho was born. Having had a vision that the child she was carrying would one day become a fiend who would slay both his parents, his mother abandoned him at birth in a field, where a family servant secretly rescued and reared him. Of course, part of this is a mythos about Basui. It may have well been that the parents arranged from this premonition, whatever, that the servant would be there, take in the child, and all would be well. And of course, he did slay both his parents, not in a literal sense whatsoever, but he freed himself from the narrow places they had put upon him, which is what we all must do in growing up, must leave the narrow places we've inherited from our parents, from our upbringing, and come into our own wholeness as human beings. So in a sense, he did slay his parents, but had nothing to do with any kind of literal damage. At 7, Basui's sensitive religious mind began to evince itself. At a memorial service for his late father, he suddenly asked the officiating priest, "For whom are those offerings of rice and cakes and fruit?" "For your father, of course," replied the priest. "But father has no shape or body now." The note says in Japan, the dead are usually cremated. So how can he eat them? To this the priest answered, "Though he has no visible body, his soul will receive those offerings." "If there is such a thing as a soul," the child pressed on, "I must have one in my body. What is it like?" To be sure, these are not unusual questions from a thoughtful, sensitive child of 7. For Basui, however, they were only the beginning of an intense, unremitting self-inquiry which was to continue well into manhood, in fact, until he had achieved full enlightenment. Even during his play with other children, he was never free of these uncertainties as to the existence of a soul. His preoccupation with the soul naturally led him to think about hell. In an agony of fear, he would exclaim, "How awful to be consumed by the flames of hell," and tears would well up. When he was 10, he relates, he was often awakened by brilliant flashes of light which filled his room, followed by an all-enveloping darkness. Anxiously, he sought for some explanation for these weird occurrences, but the replies that were forthcoming scarcely allayed his fears. Again and again he questioned himself, if after death the soul suffers the agonies of hell or enjoys the delights of paradise, what is the nature of the soul? But if there is no soul, what is within me which this very moment is seeing and hearing? His biographer relates that Basui would often sit for hours stewing over this question in a state of such utter self-forgetfulness he no longer knew he had a body or a mind. On one such occasion, at what age we're not told, Basui suddenly directly realized that the substratum of all things is a viable emptiness, and that there is in essence nothing which can be called a soul, a body, or a mind. This realization caused him to break into deep laughter, and he no longer felt himself oppressed by his body and mind. In an effort to learn whether this constituted true awakening, Basui questioned a number of well-known monks, but none could give him a satisfying answer. At any rate, he told himself, I no longer have doubts about the truth of the Dharma. But his basic perplexity as to the one who sees and hears had not been dispelled. And when he saw in a popular book one day, mind is host and body guest, every one of his quiescent doubts was suddenly resurrected. I have seen that the foundation of the universe is voidness. Still, what is this something within me which can see and hear? He desperately asked himself anew. In spite of every effort, he could not rid himself of this obsessive doubt. Nominally, Basui was a samurai, having been born into a samurai family. Whether he actually pursued the duties of a samurai, his biographer does not reveal, but it seems safe to conclude that Basui's continuous search for Zen masters would have given him little opportunity and presumably as little taste for the life of a samurai. At all events, we do know that Basui had his head shaved at 29, symbolizing his initiation into the Buddhist monkhood. For the ceremonial rites of a monk or priest, however, he had little use, believing that a monk should live a simple life dedicated to attaining the highest truth, so as to lead others to liberation, and not engage in ceremony and luxurious living. The ceremonies then were very elaborate, there was a sense of brocades and luxury and other things. So not to mention political intrigue to which the priesthood of his day was only too prone. On his numerous pilgrimages, he stubbornly refused to remain even overnight in a temple, but insisted on staying in some isolated hut high up on a hill or mountain. where he would sit hour after hour doing zazen away from the distractions of the temple. To stay awake, he would often climb a tree, perch among the branches, and deeply ponder his natural koan. Who is the master? Far into the night, oblivious to wind and rain. In the morning, with virtually no sleep or food, he would go to the temple or monastery for an encounter with the master. So strong was Basui's distaste for the ceremonialism of the temple that many years later, after he'd become a master of Kogakuji, he always insisted on calling it Kogaku-an. Instead, the suffix "an" meaning hermitage, as opposed to the more grandiose "ji" meaning temple or monastery. In the course of his spiritual journeys, Basui eventually met the Zen master through whom his mind's eye was to be completely opened, Koho Zenji, a great Zen Roshi of his day. The lesser masters from whom Basui had sought guidance had all sanctioned his enlightenment, but Koho, sensing Basui's keen, sensitive mind and the strength and purity of his yearning for truth, did not give him his stamp of approval, but merely invited him to remain. On his part, Basui recognized in Koho a great Roshi, but declined to stay in his temple, taking a solitary hut in the nearby hills, and for the next month coming daily to see Koho. One day, Koho, sensing the ripeness of Basui's mind, asked him, "Tell me, what is Jiaochu's mu?" Basui started to reply, "Mountains and rivers, grass and trees are equally mu," and Koho stopped him with, "Don't use your mind." All at once, his biographer relates, Basui felt as though he had lost his life root, like a barrel whose bottom had been smashed open. Sweat began to pour or stream from every pore of his body, and when he left Koho's room, he was in such a daze that he bumped his head several times along the walls, trying to find the outer gate of the temple. Upon reaching his hut, he wept for hours from his very depths. The tears overflowed, quote, pouring down his face like rain, unquote. In the intense combustion of this overwhelming experience, Basui's previously held conceptions and beliefs, we are told, were utterly annihilated. The following evening, Basui came to tell Koho what had happened. Hardly had he opened his mouth when Koho, who had despaired of ever finding a true successor among his monks, declared, as though addressing all his followers, "My Dharma will not vanish. All may now be happy. My Dharma will not disappear." Koho formally conferred Inka on his disciple and gave him the Zen name Basui, high above average. Basui remained for 2 months near Koho, receiving his instruction and guidance, but Basui, who had a strong and independent mind, wished to mature his profound experience through Dharma combat with accomplished masters, so as to integrate his experience thoroughly into his conscious mind and into every act, and to develop his capacity to teach others. So he left Koho and continued to live an isolated life in forests, hills, and mountains, not far from the temples of famous masters. When not engaging them in Dharma combat, he would carry on his zazen for hours at a time. Wherever he stayed, zealous aspirants quickly discovered his whereabouts and sought his guidance. But feeling himself still deficient in the spiritual strength necessary to lead others to liberation, he resisted their efforts to make him their teacher. When their entreaties became importunate, he would pick up his meager belongings and vanish in the night. Apart from the entreaties of would-be disciples, however, he deliberately curtailed his stay in any one place so as not to become attached to it. At length, now 50, Basui built himself a hut deep in a mountain near the town of Enzan in Yamanashi Prefecture. As had happened in the past, word spread through the nearby village of the presence in the mountain of a bodhisattva, and seekers again began literally to beat a path to his hut. Now, his enlightenment having ripened, and feeling himself capable of leading others to emancipation, he no longer turned away from these seekers, but willingly accepted all who came. Soon they became a sizable flock, and when the governor of the province agreed to donate land for a monastery and his followers to build it, Bassui agreed to become its Roshi. Although Bassui disliked the designation temple or monastery, a Kogakuji at its apogee, with more than 1,000 monks and lay devotees, could hardly be described as a hermitage. Bassui was a rigid disciplinarian, and of the 33 rules he promulgated for the behavior of his disciples, interestingly enough, the first prohibited the imbibing of alcohol in any form. Just before he passed away at the age of 60, Bassui sat up in the lotus posture and, to those gathered around him, said, don't be misled. Look directly. What is this? He repeated this loudly and then calmly died. The teaching methods of all great masters inevitably grow out of their own particular personalities, their spiritual questioning, and the mode of zazen which gave birth to their enlightenment. For Dogen, whose religious strivings came to a focus in a problem totally different from Bassui's, and whose full awakening came without a koan of any kind, shikantaza became the prime teaching method. Bassui's natural koan, on the other hand, was, who is the master? The Japanese word, the note says, we have rendered as master as shujin ko. In Japanese, a husband, that is the head of the house, a proprietor, a landlord, an employer, are all shujin. Ko is a term implying great respect, used in addressing a lord in ancient Japan. Master, in this sense, therefore means the head, the center of power, the controlling force. Who is the master? And therefore, as we see in the following letters, he urges his disciples to employ this mode of zazen. Aiken Roshi, by the way, told me that when Yamada Koan Roshi, had completed all his formal koan training, he took up who is hearing as the practice that he continued with the rest of his life. Who is hearing? Bassui was not a prolific writer. Besides his Dharma talk on One Mind and these letters, he wrote a single large volume called Wade Gasui. I think that's Mud and Water. And there's a good translation of the book Mud and Water if you're interested in reading all of Bassui's writings. Setting forth the principles and practices of Zen Buddhism in a smaller work, too. Just when Bassui wrote One Mind, and the letters is unknown, none of them bear a date, but presumably they were written after he'd become the master of Kogakuji. Evidently, his correspondents were disciples who were either too sick or lived too far away to come for sesshin and personal instruction. Only such extenuating circumstances and the manifest ardor and sincerity of his correspondence would have persuaded Bassui to instruct them by letter instead of by traditional means. Of course, we have Zoom, which makes all of this much easier in terms of health issues as well as distance. True, some of the letters are repetitious, but this is inevitable since Bassui is giving the same teaching in essence to each of his correspondents. Yet it is by just such repetition that Bassui, master that he is, superbly clarifies and hammers home his theme of one mind. There is little in Zen literature written by outstanding masters which is so squarely aimed at practice or is as inspiring as these writings. Bassui speaks as directly to the reader of today as he did to his correspondents of the 14th century. guiding and inspiring at every turn. Added to this is a pungent sense of paradox, coupled with a profound simplicity, which has made the Dharma talk and these letters immensely popular in Japan right down to the present day. Tokusui Zenji, a well-known Zen master of the Tokugawa period, 1603 to 1868, who, like Jiaochu, is said to have lived to the ripe age of 120, and who was himself the writer of a number of Zen letters, warmly praised both these writings as valuable not only for devotees, but even for Zen masters. It is hoped that with this translation, the first into English, they will find equal favor with English-speaking readers eager to understand and practice Zen. So here is Basui's talk on One Mind. If you would free yourself of the sufferings of samsara, samsara is the Sanskrit word that means wandering. It is the mind, or rather put it this way, it is the world that we experience with our wandering mind. If our minds were completely focused and all self-centeredness fallen away, what world would we then experience? So samsara is the world we ourselves create through the way we use our minds. If you want to free yourself from the sufferings of samsara, you must learn the direct way to become a Buddha. This way is no other than the realization of your own mind. Now, what is this mind? It is the true nature of all sentient beings, that which existed before our parents were born, and hence before our own birth, and which presently exists unchangeable and eternal. So it is called one's face before one's parents were born. This mind is intrinsically pure. When we are born, it is not newly created, and when we die, it does not perish. It has no distinction of male or female, nor has it any coloration of good or bad. It cannot be compared with anything, so it is called Buddha nature. Yet countless thoughts issue from this self-nature as waves arise in the ocean, or as images are reflected in a mirror. To realize your own mind, you must first of all look into the source from which thoughts flow. That is, all thoughts, good thoughts, bad thoughts, all of them. When doing Zazen, let all of it go. Look directly. As Basui said, don't be misled. What is this? Sleeping and working, standing and sitting, profoundly ask yourself, what is my own mind? With intense yearning to resolve this question. This is called training or practice, or desire for truth, or thirst for realization. What is termed Zazen is no more than looking into one's own mind. It is better to search your mind devotedly than to read and recite innumerable sutras and dharani every day for countless years. Such endeavors, which are but formalities, produce some merit, but this merit expires, and again you must experience the suffering of the three evil paths. However, let me just comment on that. Reading, chanting, etc., can build our faith and help deepen our insight. So it's not, it's just that if you seek to replace searching your own mind in Zazen, or into your own mind in Zazen, with things like reading sutras or other spiritual writings or chanting, this won't solve the problem. It gives a momentary peace for sure. And there have been certainly many great teachers who've come to realization reading. Yamada Roshi has a very deep experience, which he talks about in the Three Pillars of Zen. He's reading a Zen book on a train, and what he reads suddenly breaks in on him. So it's not to throw away reading, study, chanting, any of those things, but just to realize that one has to do the work oneself. Because searching one's mind, one's own mind, leads ultimately to enlightenment, this practice is a prerequisite to becoming a Buddha. No matter whether you have committed either the 10 evil deeds or the 5 deadly sins, If you turn back your mind and enlighten yourself, you are a Buddha instantly. But do not commit sins and expect to be saved by enlightenment from the effects of your own actions. For neither enlightenment, nor a Buddha, nor a Bodhisattva can save a person who, lost in delusion, goes down evil ways. Imagine a child sleeping next to its parent and dreaming it is being beaten or is painfully sick. The parents cannot help the child, no matter how much it suffers, for no one can enter the dreaming mind of another. If the child could awaken itself, it could be freed of this suffering automatically. In the same way, one who realizes that one's own mind is Buddha is instantly free from the sufferings arising from ignorance of the law, of ceaseless change, of birth and death. If Buddhas could prevent it, would they allow even one sentient being to fall into hell? Without self-realization, one cannot understand such things as these. What kind of master is it that this very moment sees colors with the eyes and hears voices with the ears, that now raises the hands and moves the feet? We know these are functions of our own mind, but no one knows precisely how they are performed. It may be asserted that behind these actions there is no entity, yet it is obvious they are being performed spontaneously. Conversely, it may be maintained that these are the acts of some entity. Still, the entity is invisible. If one regards this question as unfathomable, all attempts to reason out an answer will cease, and one will be at a loss to know what to do. In this propitious state, deepen and deepen the yearning tirelessly to the extreme. When the profound questioning penetrates to the very bottom, and that bottom is broken open, not the slightest doubt will remain that your own mind is itself Buddha, the void universe. There will be then no anxiety about life or death, no truth to search for. In a dream, you may stray and lose your way home. You ask someone to show you how to return, or you pray to God or Buddhas to help you, but still, you can't get home. Once you rouse yourself from your dream state, however, you find that you are in your own bed and realize that the only way you could have gotten home was to awaken yourself. This kind of spiritual awakening is called return to the origin or rebirth in paradise. It is the kind of inner realization that can be achieved with some training. Virtually all who like Zazen and make an effort in practice, be they lay people or monks, can experience to this degree. Of course, you have to keep going. You have to persist. You have to be consistent. But even such partial awakening cannot be attained except through the practice of Zazen. And again, that doesn't mean, sit 5 minutes here and sit 5 minutes there. It means carrying through persistently and consistently, continuing on. Who sees colors with the eyes? Who hears sounds with the ears? Just move, just this count. 1, 2, just this breath. You would be making a serious, error, however, were you assume that this was true enlightenment, in which there is no doubt about the nature of reality. You would be like one who, having found copper, gives up the desire for gold. Upon such realization, question yourself even more intensely in this wise. My body is like a phantom, like bubbles on a stream. My mind, looking into itself, is as formless as empty space, yet somewhere within sounds are perceived. Who is hearing? As I said, that was Yamada Roshi's a lifetime practice after he completed all his formal training and had begun teaching. He consistently worked on who is hearing. Should you question yourself in this wise with profound absorption, never slackening the intensity of your effort, your rational mind eventually will exhaust itself, and only questioning at the deepest level will remain. Finally, you will lose awareness of your own body. Your long-held conceptions and notions will perish after absolute questioning in the way that every drop of water vanishes from a tub broken open at the bottom, and perfect enlightenment will follow like flowers suddenly blooming on withered trees. You remember that line from the Oxherding Pictures, of course, the 10th Oxherding Pictures. Without effort, without any additional practices, withered trees he swiftly brings to bloom. With such realization, you achieve true emancipation, but even now repeatedly cast off what has been realized, turning back to the subject that realizes, that is, to the root bottom, and resolutely go on. Your self-nature will then grow brighter and more transparent as your delusive feelings perish, like a gem gaining luster under repeated polishing, until at last it positively illumines the entire universe. The entire universe is your own nature. Why shouldn't it be illuminated? Your own mind, your own nature. What are we talking about? Don't doubt this. Should your yearning be too weak to lead you to this state in your present lifetime, you will undoubtedly gain self-realization easily in the next, provided you are still engaged in this questioning at death, just as yesterday's work, half done, was finished easily today. In Zazen, neither despise nor cherish the thoughts that arise. Only search your own mind, the very source of these thoughts. You must understand that anything appearing in your consciousness or seen by your eyes is an illusion of no enduring reality. Of course, this doesn't mean it doesn't have a foundation in reality, and it isn't separate from reality. He's saying it's not like Maya in Indian philosophy, that is, all is illusion. That's not quite the point here. But it's not to cling to it because it doesn't have a substantial, separate nature. It is illusory if we understand it in a self-oriented way. Maybe gets something at it. Hence, you should neither fear nor be fascinated by such phenomena. In other words, things are going to appear and disappear. Nothing has a permanent, separate nature. You should neither fear nor be fascinated by such phenomena. If you keep your mind as empty as space, unstained by extraneous matters, no evil spirits can disturb you even on your deathbed. While engaged in Zazen, however, keep none of this counsel in mind. You must only become the question, what is this mind? Or what is it, or who is it that hears these sounds? Or what is Mu? Or what is any koan that you're working with? Or 1, 2. Absorb yourself fully in the practice, not in your thoughts about the practice or about yourself. Allow those to fall away. Absorb yourself in the practice is the point. While engaged in Zazen, however, keep none of this counsel in mind. Only become the question, what is this mind? Or what is it that hears these sounds? When you realize this mind, you will know that it is the very source of all Buddhas and sentient beings. The Bodhisattva Kannon of Avalokiteshvara is so called because he attained enlightenment perceiving, that is, grasping the source of the sounds of the world, all the sounds all about him. Kannon, hearer of the cries of the world. In the sutras, the Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara, which is the Sanskrit that became Kuan Yin in China, one of the forms, Kanji Zai or Kannon in Japan, is the attained enlightenment. I think that's in the, might be in the Lotus Sutras or the, anyway, attained enlightenment by paying attention to who's hearing, to every sound. So when he attained fullest enlightenment, complete enlightenment, he's known as the one who hears the cries of the world and can respond compassionately, because there's no self-centeredness there separating him at all. Completely absorbed in who is hearing. Everything else falls away. Which is gives us the ability to respond appropriately, rather than keeping ourselves held off at arm's length. At work, at rest, never stop trying to realize who it is that hears. Even though your questioning penetrates the unconscious, you won't find the one who hears, and all your efforts will come to naught. Yet sounds can be heard, so question yourself to an even profounder level. At last, every vestige of self-awareness will disappear, and you will feel like a cloudless sky. Within yourself you will find no I, nor will you discover anyone who hears. This mind is like the void, yet it hasn't a single spot that can be called empty. Do not mistake this state for self-realization, but continue to ask yourself even more intensely, now, who is it that hears? If you bore into this question, oblivious to anything else, even this feeling of voidness will vanish and you won't be aware of anything. Total darkness will prevail. Don't stop here, but keep asking with all your strength, what is it that hears? Or who is it that hears? Only when you have completely exhausted the questioning will the question burst. Now you will feel like someone who has come back from the dead. This is true realization. You will see the Buddhas of all the universes face to face, and the Dharma ancestors past and present. Test yourself with this koan. A monk asked Zhao Chu, what is the meaning of Bodhidharmas coming to China? Zhao Chu replied, the oak tree in the garden. Should this koan leave you with the slightest doubt, you need to resume questioning. What is it that hears? If you don't come to realization in this present life, when will you? Once you have died, you won't be able to avoid a long period of suffering in the three evil paths. The note says, according to Buddhist teaching, enlightenment can be attained only with a human body. What is meant here, and in the preceding passage, is that if one loses one's human form, and with it the opportunity for enlightenment and higher states of consciousness, that is, less self-centered states of consciousness, as I said, samsara shifts. It's the world created by our wandering mind. As our mind becomes less wandering, less self-oriented, then we enter a wider world, we might say. Higher states of consciousness are less self-oriented. If that's what happens, one may have to undergo long suffering in less human or subhuman states of existence in the bardo. That is Buddhist teaching, or also one may be reborn. Buddhist teaching in less than propitious states than one has at present. Of course, to really keep in mind that if you do your best, with whatever you're doing, however you're living. If you treat others with kindness and respect, and you do your best at the work in hand in front of you and the things you have to do, the odds are whatever comes after death, you'll be up to the same way you've dealt with whatever you've dealt with in your life. If you come forward with integrity, then, we don't have to add an extra fear here. Uh, Try and live with integrity, and that will follow through with you wherever you are, whatever you're dealing with, in this life or any other. What is obstructing realization? Nothing but your own half-hearted desire for truth. Think of this and exert yourself. Doesn't mean strain. Just give it your all as best you can. Exert yourself to the utmost is Basui's point. So we have time to read one of his short letters to a parishioner. It goes like this: to a man from Kumasaka. You asked me to write you how to practice Zen on your sick bed. Who is he that is sick? Who is he that is practicing Zen? Do you know who you are? One's whole being is Buddha nature. One's whole being is the great way. The substance of this way is inherently immaculate and transcends all forms. Is there any sickness in it? Your own mind is the essential substance of all Buddhas, your face, before your parents were born. It is a matter of seeing and hearing, of all the senses. One who fully realizes this is a Buddha. One who does not is an ordinary human being. Hence, all Buddhas and ancestral teachers point directly to the human mind, so that people can see their own self-nature and thereby attain Buddhahood. For the best relief for one perplexed by shadows is to see the real thing. But again, sometimes the shadow can tell us that there's something really there. Like if you're walking along, I think it's Thoreau who says, he knows that the hawk is soaring overhead because he sees its shadow on the ground before him. So sometimes the shadows help us to realize there's something real there that we can look up and see. So we don't despise or look down on the shadows either. Everything can be helpful if you use it. Once a man was invited to the home of a friend. As he was about to drink a cup of wine offered him, he believed he saw a baby snake inside his cup. Not wishing to embarrass his host by drawing attention to it, he bravely swallowed it. Upon returning home, he felt severe pains in his stomach. Many remedies were applied, but in vain, and the man, now grievously ill, felt he was about to die. His friend, hearing of his condition, asked him once more to his home. Seating his friend in the same place, he again offered him a cup of wine, telling him it was medicine. And the ailing man as the ailing man raised his cup to drink, once again, he saw a baby snake in it. This time he drew his host's attention to it without a word. The host pointed to the ceiling above his guest where a bow hung. Suddenly the sick man realized that the baby snake was the reflection of the hanging bow. Both men looked at each other and laughed. The pain of the sick man vanished instantly, and he recovered his health. Becoming a Buddha is analogous to this. Master Yoka said, when you realize the true nature of the universe, you know that there is neither subjective nor objective reality. At that very moment, karmic formations which would carry you to the lowest hell are wiped out. This true nature is the root substance of every sentient being. Human beings, however, can't bring themselves to believe that their own minds are the great completeness realized by the Buddha. So they cling to superficial forms and look for truth outside this mind, striving to become Buddhas through ascetic practices and such. But as the illusion of an ego self does not vanish, people must undergo suffering in the three worlds of desire, form and formlessness, past, present, future. the worlds of time and space, in other words. They are like the one who became sick believing he had swallowed a baby snake. We take this illusion of a self-centered self for real, and we all suffer the consequences. And these are not trivial consequences. Look at our world today. Look at Putin. He thinks his self-centered self is so real that somehow he's entitled to murder others in order to make himself feel better. Can you think of a more delusive understanding of life than that? If you ever wonder why you're practicing Zen, look at our world. See the outcomes, the terrible outcomes of this simple lack of understanding of the nature of our own mind, of our own self, who hears sounds right now, who thinks thoughts right now, who sees colors with the eyes right now. For lack of paying attention to this, you can trace every evil, every grief that human beings have wrought upon the planet to this simple error. There is a way of working this out. It's called practice. Various remedies were of no avail, but he recovered instantly upon realizing the basic truth. So just look into your own mind. No one can help you with nostrums. In a sutra, the Buddha said, if you would get rid of your foe, you have only to realize that that foe is delusion. All phenomena in the world are illusory. They have no abiding substance. So again, be careful. If you say all phenomena in the world are illusory, no, your dog isn't illusory, your child isn't illusory. This tree, if you bump your head into it, is going to hurt. It's just not my tree. That's the illusion. It's not my child, it's my child. It's not my car, it's my car. Everything has its own worth, its own reality. But they have no abiding substance. Nothing lasts. It's illusory in that sense if we give away too much to things. We try to own them or we try to control them, but what are they? What is the self? To push the self forward to become one with the 10,000 things is called delusion, said Dogen. But to allow the things to realize themselves as the self is intimacy or realization. The 10,000 things step in and are me when I'm totally absorbed in who's hearing. There's only the sound, there's only the color, there's only the caw of the crow, there's only the tree moving in the wind, there's only the dog shit on the sidewalk, there's the 10,000 things step in. It's a broadening experience. It's a coming home to really wake to this and then to live from it every moment. That is the point of our work in practice, to come home to what's actually so, that we ignore again and again as we get lost in thoughts. Of course, there's nothing wrong with thinking. It's terribly important. It's just that when we identify with our thoughts and create a separated world in which we're isolated in some interior, we've created a secondary realm. And in that secondary realm, we go through all kinds of experiences on our way towards maturing further, which is to have less self-centeredness. So that's kind of how it goes. Sentient beings, no less than Buddhas, are like images reflected in water. One who does not see the true nature of things mistakes shadow for substance. That is to say, in Zazen, the state of emptiness and quiet which results from the diminution of thought is often confused with one's face before one's parents were born. Just not having thoughts in the mind is not yet it. It's certainly calming and centering and a relief. It's like putting down your luggage and standing up straight without having to lug it around. So that's good. But this serenity is also a reflection upon water. You must advance beyond the stage where your reason is of any avail. This happens again and again in koan practice. That you find that you've come to the end of what reason can do for you. You have to step beyond it. If you live your life within logic, not using logic, and reason are very important. But if you live bound inside logic, you'll never know really anything except what you can logically think. How do you digest food? How do you fall in love? How do you catch a ball thrown to you? You do these things. Has logic ever answered any of those things? How do you deal with grief? Logic is a useful tool, but when we live inside logic and reason, we give up our own power. And that's what Bassui is talking about. As lay people, of course, it's very important we live in both worlds, that is, of things, of people, of others, and yet not to lose the ground in, for lack of a better word, true nature, vast emptiness, nothing to be called holy, the real ground we come forward from in every minute, this magical universe in which breath becomes a thought, in which eating a bagel becomes a muscle and bone, in which the singing of birds can be like music, in which the sun rises and the day gets bright, in which the sun sets and the stars appear, in which a crow calls and flowers appear in spring. I mean, how can you explain this with logic? But that doesn't mean we don't use logic. Again, it's an important tool, but to live within it, to not experience the strangeness and the incredible beauty of this life. How sad that is. That's what Bassui is trying to get us to wake to. In this extremity of not knowing what to think or do, ask yourself, who's the master? This one will become your intimate only after you've broken a walking stick made from a rabbit's horn or crushed a chunk of ice in fire. Tell me now, who is this most intimate of yours? Who is this most intimate of yours? Today is the 8th of the month. Tomorrow is the 13th. So that will end our teisho for this morning. I'll stop the recording